David Beckham had always been known for his stylish presence on and off the pitch. Years after retiring from professional football, he found himself deeply immersed in various ventures. Some were endorsements, others were philanthropic, but none ignited his passion quite like his investments in high-end dining. This particular restaurant, nestled in the heart of an exclusive London neighborhood, was his pride and joy. He had spent years developing the concept, curating the menu in collaboration with renowned chefs, and perfecting every detail of its interior design. He wanted a place that combined modern elegance with a welcoming atmosphere, somewhere that made guests feel pampered without ever crossing the line into pretentiousness. From the exclusive wine list to the subtle glow of artfully placed pendant lights, the establishment bore David's personal stamp of excellence. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Despite his love for this restaurant, David seldom made a show of ownership. Few people knew he was one of the primary investors, and even fewer recognized the depth of his involvement. He knew what it was like to be under a microscope with cameras and fans trailing him relentlessly. Whenever he stepped foot into a public space, even something as everyday as a coffee shop, there was always a ripple of excitement. Yet at this particular spot, he could sometimes slip in almost unnoticed if he wore a discreet outfit and avoided speaking too loudly. He valued that anonymity. It allowed him to observe how customers were treated, how the staff managed daily operations, and whether the restaurant met the high standards he had set. On that fateful evening, however, an unfortunate string of events would challenge the staff's training and highlight exactly why a little humility and graciousness could make all the difference. He arrived at the restaurant around 8 in the evening, choosing to wear a stylish but understated black shirt with dark jeans. A well-fitted jacket concealed most of his silhouette, and a simple cap was pulled low over his face. London in autumn can be chilly, so the ensemble didn't look out of place. He stepped out of a discreet black car, the driver instructed to wait at a distance so as not to draw attention. David made his way to the front entrance, his heart beating with a familiar sense of pride when he saw the sign etched in elegant, minimalist font. The subdued lighting cast a warm glow across the polished brass door handles. He couldn't help smiling to himself, pleased by how everything looked from the outside. It radiated exactly the sort of sophistication he'd envisioned. The hostess stationed at the reception podium did not recognize him at first glance. She offered a polite smile and asked if he had a reservation. David answered in his soft voice, "I'm not sure if you have a table available. I'd love to dine in if possible." She peered down at her reservation list, scanning it with a trained eye. It was a busy Friday night, and typically, bookings had been made weeks in advance. Even so, she spotted a no-show and indicated that they might be able to seat him. With a courteous tone, she requested a moment to consult the maitre d'. David observed her graceful manner with approval. That was exactly the type of politeness he hoped every guest would receive. However, as David waited, he couldn't help noticing a tall man with an air of impatience standing off to one side. This man wore the restaurant's standard black and white waiting staff uniform, but there was something about his posture, arms folded across his chest, lips pursed in a slight sneer, that seemed off. Another more senior waiter approached him to whisper something, presumably about the unexpected open table. That tall waiter shook his head slightly and rolled his eyes. David raised an eyebrow, wondering what might be the issue. The hostess soon returned and escorted David to a recently vacated booth near the corner of the main dining area. As David passed the tall waiter, the man shot him a cursory glance as though sizing him up, then turned away with a dismissive shrug. The moment was fleeting, but it left David with a nagging sense of unease. Once seated, David took a moment to soak in the restaurant's atmosphere. The interior was a flawless blend of modern design elements, polished concrete floors, plush leather banquettes, and slender black tables set with crystal stemware. Soft music drifted through the space, providing a relaxing, intimate mood. Warm lighting reflected off the tasteful artwork on the walls. Watching the servers weave among the tables, he could tell they'd been well trained in the choreography of service. He noted their meticulous attention to detail as they poured wine and presented dishes with careful elegance. Everywhere he looked, the staff seemed to embody the restaurant's ethos of quiet sophistication. Everywhere except for that one tall waiter who lingered near the bar, occasionally glancing over with thinly veiled contempt. David tried to brush it off, reminding himself that perhaps he was being overly sensitive. After all, he had spent years in the public eye, constantly analyzing every look and whisper from those around him. He opened the menu, smiling at the offerings he had helped develop. Head chef Armand, a culinary genius from Lyon, had designed a menu that blended French techniques with international influences. David's personal favorite was a braised short rib dish with a cauliflower puree and roasted vegetables. But there were also seafood plates and a carefully curated vegetarian selection. Just reading the descriptions made his mouth water. When a waiter approached his table, David was momentarily relieved to see it was not the tall man he'd noticed, but a young woman with a pleasant smile. She greeted him warmly, introduced herself as Natalie, and inquired whether he would like sparkling or still water. David politely requested still water and asked a few questions about the specials. Natalie answered confidently, recommending a particular seafood risotto that had been winning rave reviews. He thanked her and signaled he would need another minute to decide. So far, so good, he thought, resting back against the comfortable leather booth. Before Natalie could return, the tall waiter materialized at David's table in her stead. "Have you decided yet?" he asked, his voice tinged with impatience. Taken aback, David looked up and saw that the man seemed aggravated. The silver name badge on his vest read Derek. David offered a quick smile, hoping to diffuse any tension. "I was just about to order the braised short rib," he said gently, though the risotto sounded quite appealing as well. Derek let out a small scoff, as if insulted by the indecision. "We're extremely busy tonight," he said, tapping his pen against the notepad. "If you can't decide, perhaps you should come back another time. We don't do well with people who dither." David felt a jolt of surprise. It was shockingly rude, and absolutely not the kind of behavior any staff member of his restaurant should display. Keeping his composure, he responded, "I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I'll have the braised short rib. Could I also have some sparkling water, actually?" He decided to switch to sparkling on a whim, partly to see if Derek's brusque behavior would mellow. But Derek sighed. "You just asked for still water. Now you want sparkling. Do you have any idea how many steps we're already behind tonight?" David's eyes widened. There was a distinct moment in which he considered revealing who he was. However, he chose not to. He wanted to see how far Derek's attitude would go. David observed the restaurant discreetly. The other staff moved with calm efficiency. None seemed flustered or stressed. There was no evidence of them being in the weeds. Derek's mention of them being behind didn't ring true. Natalie passed by and noticed Derek at David's table. She rushed over, concern clearly etched on her face. "I can take this, Derek," she offered, stepping in. "I already talked to this gentleman." Derek waved her off, replying rudely, "I've got it. Run along and do your side work. We don't need too many hands in one place." Natalie looked taken aback, but she stepped away, shooting David an apologetic glance. David mustered a polite smile, mouthing, "It's okay," though clearly it wasn't. Derek took David's order and stalked off to the kitchen, leaving David to wrestle with an uncomfortable mixture of anger and disappointment. He had never wanted a dictatorship in his establishment. He had been clear with the management. The staff should be well-trained, team-oriented, and above all, respectful to every guest. Derek's manners were the antithesis of everything David stood for. Nonetheless, David held his tongue for now. He reached for his phone, more out of habit than anything, and scrolled briefly through messages from his wife, Victoria, who was away on a fashion business trip in Milan. He considered texting her about the bizarre encounter. Instead, he set his phone down and decided to focus on the night at hand. He wanted to see if this was a one-off occurrence or a pattern. In the back of his mind, he made a mental note to have a serious conversation with the restaurant's manager after dinner. While waiting for his meal, David couldn't help overhearing Derek at a nearby table. There, a young couple sat, nervously celebrating what seemed like an anniversary. They appeared timid, occasionally whispering to each other and studying the menu with wide eyes. Derek hovered with impatience as they asked simple questions about the dishes. He rolled his eyes when the woman inquired about the difference between the house salad and the signature salad. "One is a house salad," he said, trying and failing to hide sarcasm, "and one is the chef's special recipe. It's right there on the menu." His tone had a condescending edge that made the poor woman shrink back in her seat. David's jaw clenched as he watched. If there was one thing that bothered him most, it was seeing paying customers being disrespected in an environment he had meticulously cultivated to be inviting. Finally, David's dish arrived, brought to him by Natalie rather than Derek. She apologized softly, placing the braised short rib in front of him. "I'm so sorry about earlier," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "He's new and we're still trying to—" She paused, evidently searching for the right words. "We're trying to help him understand how things work here." David offered a gentle nod. "No worries," he reassured her, though inside, his thoughts were brimming with concerns. He looked down at the dish. It was plated beautifully, a tender short rib glistening with rich glaze, accompanied by a silky cauliflower puree and bright green roasted broccolini. The aroma wafting upward was heavenly, a testament to the chef's skill. Determined not to let Derek's foul attitude ruin his meal, David dug in. With each bite, he was reminded of how exceptional the restaurant could be when everything came together. The fresh ingredients, the expert cooking, the harmony of flavors. Chef Armand strolled by, as he usually did, greeting select tables and gauging reactions to his creations. Though Chef Armand had met David several times, he failed to recognize him in the dim lighting, dressed in such ordinary clothes. David didn't mind. He gave the chef a friendly nod and a thumbs up of approval. For a moment, he let himself savor the gastronomic delight, pushing aside any tension. Yet in the corner of his eye, he noticed Derek carrying a tray of dirty dishes, still wearing that scowl as though the entire world were an inconvenience to him. After finishing the meal, one of the best short ribs David had ever tasted, he decided to evaluate the dessert menu. He rarely indulged in sweets, but the restaurant was famous for its decadent chocolate souffle. It was an intricate dish that required perfect timing. While he waited for the dessert menu, he couldn't help but overhear Derek's voice once again, this time directed at an older couple who were inquiring about dietary restrictions. "If you can't eat half of the ingredients on our menu, maybe this place isn't right for you," Derek said curtly, barely hushed. The older woman looked mortified, her companion equally stunned. The man asked politely, "Could we speak to the manager?" That simple request seemed to enrage Derek further, who retorted, "He's busy at the moment. Maybe he'll find time if you wait long enough." David's stomach twisted in knots. This was exactly the kind of scenario he had wanted to avoid at all costs. As David contemplated stepping in, the restaurant's manager, a dignified woman named Grace, finally intervened. Grace was known for her calm authority and her ability to solve any crisis with level-headedness. She approached Derek, gently pulled him aside, and whispered something that David couldn't quite catch. Derek shrugged dismissively. After a few more words from Grace, he stomped off toward the kitchen, leaving her to address the distressed couple. She immediately offered apologies, guiding them through possible menu modifications with genuine warmth. Her approach exemplified the ethos David had always hoped to maintain. When Grace finished smoothing over the situation, she locked eyes with David from across the dining room. There was a hint of recognition in her gaze, but she did not outwardly react. She simply gave him a small nod as if to say, "I see you, I'm on it." Soon after, Natalie returned to take David's dessert order. He asked for the chocolate souffle and a small pot of Earl Grey tea. "Absolutely," she confirmed, scribbling it down and offering a genuine smile. However, before she could leave, Derek returned yet again, standing at the edge of David's table. "You're done with your main," he said, pointing at the half-empty glass of sparkling water. "Are you going to linger here all night, or can we clear this for other guests who actually want to enjoy their dinner?" His tone dripped with condescension. David, usually unflappable, felt his composure slip. He fixed Derek with a measured stare. "I've just ordered dessert," he said quietly. "I'm not quite finished here." Derek rolled his eyes, and for the first time, David saw the faintest twitch of recognition in them, as though Derek was finally seeing him properly, or perhaps suspecting that this patron might not be an ordinary customer. Yet the man pressed on, almost as if doubling down on his behavior. "Look, if you're waiting for some kind of special treatment, it's not going to happen. We have actual VIPs coming tonight, so please eat your dessert and then make room." The nerve was astonishing. David did not want to create a public scene, especially in the restaurant he owned. But this had gone too far. He kept a level gaze, choosing his words carefully. "You're very sure there won't be special treatment for me?" he asked. Derek scoffed. "You're just another customer wasting time in a booth that a real VIP could be using." David felt an adrenaline surge. He had encountered plenty of rude behavior in his life, from reporters, from fans of rival teams, even occasionally from a disgruntled server who recognized him. But in his own establishment, it stung differently. Before he could reply, Grace approached again. She slid in next to Derek, quietly instructing him to head to the back. Derek did not budge, glaring at Grace as if her authority meant nothing. David could see the tension on her face. With all eyes on them, Derek finally threw the towel he was carrying onto a nearby table in frustration and stomped off to the kitchen. In the hush that followed, David could feel a wave of relief settle over the dining room. Other guests had undoubtedly noticed the commotion, some glancing over with curiosity or discomfort. Natalie murmured an apology. Grace also apologized profusely for the disruption, offering to comp David's meal or at least the dessert. David shook his head. "No, please," he said kindly, though with an undercurrent of steel. "It's not your fault." Grace nodded, gratitude flickering in her eyes. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked quietly, leaning in so other patrons wouldn't hear. She seemed to be walking a tightrope, torn between wanting to help David and wanting to maintain composure in front of the other guests. "Just bring the souffle, please," David said, letting out a sigh. "And after I've finished, if it's not too late, I'd like to have a brief conversation with you in private." Grace nodded emphatically. "Absolutely," she affirmed. Then she offered him the dessert menu again, just in case he wanted anything else. David declined, content with his choice of souffle and tea. Once she had gone to relay the order to the kitchen, David took a moment to center himself. The night was not unfolding how he'd hoped, but perhaps it served as a necessary wake-up call. If Derek was new, how did he manage to slip through the hiring process? Were there gaps in the training? David felt a surge of responsibility, realizing he might have been too hands-off recently. The restaurant's success had lulled him into complacency, perhaps leading him to assume the staff remained impeccable without his regular oversight. While waiting for dessert, David turned his attention to the vibrant scene around him. Despite Derek's disruptions, the restaurant still exuded a glamorous charm. Couples chatted over candlelit tables, the hush of their voices mingling with the clink of silverware. Satisfied diners leaned back, sipping on vintage wines while swirling the contents of their glasses. In the far corner, an engaged pair excitedly discussed their wedding plans, while at the bar, a solitary businessman typed away on a laptop, occasionally pausing to take bites of a decadent truffle pasta. The place hummed with the kind of life David had always envisioned. It pained him that one staff member could tarnish this exquisite atmosphere. At last, the chocolate souffle arrived, an airy, fragrant masterpiece that gently rose from its ramekin. Natalie used a small spoon to crack the top, then poured in a stream of warm chocolate sauce that sank into the delicate pastry. The aroma of cocoa filled the air, momentarily erasing the tension. David took the first bite, letting the rich, soft texture melt on his tongue. It was sublime, a testament to Chef Armand's prowess. For a few minutes, David simply enjoyed his dessert, savoring each mouthful. It was as if the restaurant was offering a sweet apology for its earlier mishaps. Midway through the souffle, David noticed a disturbance in the corner of the restaurant. Derek had re-emerged from the kitchen, engaged in a hushed but heated argument with Grace. Though the conversation was too far away for David to hear, their body language spoke volumes. Grace stood tall, arms at her sides but shoulders firm, while Derek towered over her, jabbing a finger in the air as if to punctuate his points. Occasional words drifted across the room, something about ridiculous standards and coddling customers. David shook his head in disbelief. How had this individual come to work in a place that prided itself on exceptional hospitality? When David finished his dessert, he stood up from the booth and moved quietly toward the discreet hallway near the back where the restrooms and private office were located. Natalie, noticing him leave his seat, quickly signaled to Grace that he might be ready for that conversation. Grace followed, ensuring David had enough space so as not to draw unwanted attention from the other patrons. In that hallway, the hum of the dining room faded, replaced by the subdued lighting and relative quiet. "Sir," Grace said softly, "I'm so terribly sorry for everything that's happened tonight." David exhaled a long breath. "It's all right," he replied, though his voice carried an authoritative edge. "I've seen enough to know this needs addressing. The behavior I've witnessed doesn't align with what I've always believed this restaurant should represent." Grace nodded fervently. "I completely agree. I joined this team because I believed in the vision, Mr. Beckham. She froze, eyes widening slightly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak out of turn. David gave a gentle smile, removing his cap so she could see his face fully in the hallway's light. I know who you mean, he said. I'm David Beckham. Grace's cheeks flushed. Even though she had suspected as much, confirmation still took her by surprise. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You don't have to apologize, and I appreciate everything you've done tonight. You handled the difficult situations with professionalism. Grace seemed momentarily flustered, then regained her composure. She lowered her voice and added, Mr. Beckham, I had no idea you were coming tonight. I would have prepared a more... David shook his head. Don't worry, he cut her off kindly. I wanted to observe as a regular guest, and now I see there's a problem that needs sorting out. Let's be direct. Derek is out of line. I don't believe our philosophy tolerates such hostility toward guests, does it? Grace's face was a picture of relief that David wasn't blaming her, but also tension at the knowledge that this was a serious matter. Absolutely not, she said, her voice tremulous. He's very new. I hired him on the recommendation of someone who assured me he had strong references, but from day one, I've had concerns. David nodded, understanding that sometimes references can be misleading, or maybe Derek's previous employers hadn't been as thorough with their feedback. I appreciate your loyalty to the staff, but this can't continue, he said firmly. I'm going to have a talk with him, but first, how about you bring him here? I won't make a public scene. Grace's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but she quickly agreed. Certainly. Let me go get him, she said, and disappeared around the corner. David took a moment to steady himself. He was used to pressure, used to the cameras and the high-stakes world of celebrity. Yet confronting a rude employee was a different kind of tension. He inhaled slowly, recalling all the times in his playing career when he had to have stern conversations with younger teammates or even managers. This was about setting a standard, about upholding the restaurant's values. A moment later, Derek came into view, shuffling reluctantly behind Grace. His arms were folded, and there was a noticeable defiance in his expression. So, you wanted to speak to me? Derek asked, voice laced with annoyance. He still had no idea who David really was. David studied him quietly for a second. Yes, David said softly. I have a few things to discuss about your approach to hospitality this evening. Derek let out a short laugh. Look, I already got an earful from the manager. If you think you're going to scare me off with some complaint, you can save it. We get all kinds of complainers. David's gaze hardened. What I have to say isn't simply a complaint. It's an observation as someone who has a vested interest in this establishment. Derek rolled his eyes. What, do you own the place or something? He said, sarcasm dripping from his words. David paused deliberately, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Actually, he began, his voice calm but resolute. I do. For the first time, Derek seemed to falter. His eyes darted to Grace, who nodded solemnly. He's the principal owner, she added. Derek's complexion paled. The bravado that had fueled his condescending remarks all evening evaporated in an instant. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. David continued, I came here tonight hoping to enjoy a meal and see how the restaurant is doing. Instead, I witnessed a member of my staff insulting customers, belittling them for asking questions, and showing complete disrespect for the fundamentals of good service. Derek swallowed hard, looking trapped. I didn't know, I didn't recognize... It shouldn't matter who I am, David interjected. Every guest should be treated with respect, whether they're a famous athlete, a local business person, or a young couple celebrating an occasion. That's the standard here. David spoke slowly, letting each word sink in. He could see Derek's shoulders slump as the reality of the situation landed. I'm sorry, sir, Derek managed to say. The arrogance was replaced by a stammering attempt at contrition. I was under pressure. Things got on top of me. I didn't realize... He trailed off, knowing full well how hollow his excuses sounded. David took another moment, considering how best to handle this. He was a firm believer in second chances, having received them himself at various points in life, but Derek's behavior had been extreme. People get stressed, that's true, David acknowledged. But what you did goes beyond stress. You insulted customers who were paying for a special experience. You embarrassed them in front of other diners. You threatened the reputation of a business that dozens of staff members work hard to uphold. Derek bowed his head. "I'm sorry," he repeated, voice quivering. "If you give me another chance, I promise I'll do better. I just had a rough day." David sighed, glancing at Grace, who wore a stoic expression. He understood it was partly her call as manager, but ultimately, he had the final word. Grace cleared her throat. "Derek, we value sincerity here. If you truly want to be part of this team, there must be a genuine transformation in your attitude. This can't just be about not knowing who you were serving. It's about how you treat everyone. Mr. Beckham is the owner, but even if he were just an ordinary customer, the same standard applies." Derek nodded vigorously, trying to salvage what remained of his dignity. "Yes, yes, absolutely," he mumbled, words tumbling over each other. David studied him. He believed in the possibility of personal growth. He had seen plenty of young footballers go from hot-headed rookies to disciplined professionals under the right guidance. Still, he needed to be sure. "Grace, do you feel there's a chance he can be coached to meet our standards?" David asked quietly. Grace hesitated, then spoke honestly. "He's shown promise with technical skills, serving, table knowledge. But the attitude has been an issue. We've been trying to correct it. It hasn't improved quickly enough." Derek wrung his hands. "I'll do better, I swear." David glanced from Derek to Grace. He felt a weighty responsibility for all involved. The staff who worked so hard, the customers who expected an exemplary dining experience, and even Derek, who might be dealing with unseen personal struggles. "All right," David finally said, voice calm. "One chance, one. If you want to stay, you'll undergo additional training and performance reviews, and if I or Grace see even a hint of the behavior I witnessed tonight, you're out. Do you understand?" Derek nodded rapidly, relief mingling with embarrassment. "Thank you. I won't let you down," he said, though he could hardly meet David's eyes. David motioned for Grace to take Derek aside and finalize the details. They walked off, leaving David alone in the softly lit hallway. He leaned against the wall, inhaling deeply. Confrontation always left him somewhat drained, but also relieved that he could address a serious issue head on. Part of him wanted to return to the dining room, possibly greet a few customers, and assure them everything was under control. Another part of him just wanted to slip out quietly. He decided on a middle path. He would step into the manager's office, quickly phone the head of operations to apprise them of what had happened, and then leave discreetly. He wanted Grace to handle any lingering tension without his celebrity status overshadowing the evening. In the manager's office, David spoke with the operations manager, explaining the situation. The manager was appalled and promised to coordinate with Grace for a thorough staff reevaluation. David, satisfied that the issue would be handled, texted his driver to bring the car around. He then headed back toward the main dining room. He spotted Natalie on his way out and thanked her for her courtesy throughout the evening. She beamed, looking both thrilled and nervous, clearly still absorbing the revelation that he was the owner. He assured her that her service was exemplary and encouraged her to keep up the good work. Before stepping out into the crisp night air, David paused near the hostess stand where the evening had first begun. The hostess who had greeted him earlier looked up, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. He smiled gently and placed a hand on the podium. "Thank you for fitting me in," he said softly. She returned his smile, her gaze flickering with curiosity. "Of course. It was our pleasure," she replied. She seemed torn between starstruck awe and professional composure. David offered a small nod and then walked out into the bustling London street. Outside, the cool breeze of the night immediately brushed against his face. He spotted his car rolling up, the headlights cutting through the dimly lit road. As he opened the door and slipped inside, he reflected on how a simple evening out had turned into a revealing encounter. While it was never pleasant to witness disrespect, he took solace in knowing that the situation could be addressed and corrected. Owning a restaurant was about more than capital and good reviews. It was about curating an entire experience, from the flavors on the plate to the warmth of the service. Even the most exquisite dish could be overshadowed by a single server's rudeness. That night reminded him why his personal involvement remained essential for the success of any business bearing his name. As the driver guided the car away from the restaurant, David glanced back through the rear window at the glowing sign. He felt a mix of pride and responsibility swelling within him. The restaurant was a testament to years of hard work, collaboration with top culinary minds, and his personal passion for hospitality. Yet it also underscored the fact that no brand or endeavor could run solely on autopilot. There had to be vigilance, leadership, and a willingness to confront challenges head on. He thought of the staff who worked tirelessly to keep the place running, from the chefs in the kitchen to the dishwashers, from the bartenders to the front of house team. So many of them mirrored the ethos he valued: respect, dedication, and courtesy. He reminded himself that an unfortunate hire did not define the business. It was simply a hurdle. The upcoming days would be devoted to ensuring the staff remained cohesive and committed to a high standard of service. Training programs could be adjusted, feedback systems refined, and perhaps further checks on references implemented. Derek would either adapt and flourish or leave without damaging the restaurant further. As the car merged onto a broader avenue, streetlights flashed across David's face. His mind wandered to how he would share the night's events with Victoria. She would likely be both livid and amused, insisting that good manners cost nothing and that Derek's insults were laughable at best. Yet David knew she would also approve of giving the new waiter a structured chance to improve. Victoria had, after all, championed young designers and employees in her fashion line, even when they struggled initially. Compassion and discipline coexisted well in their joint philosophy. London's skyline glistened in the distance, a mixture of modern high-rises and historic buildings. David felt a wave of gratitude that he had the means and opportunity to pursue his passions, whether on the football field or in the realm of fine dining. He recalled that younger version of himself, a kid with big dreams of playing for Manchester United, never imagining he'd one day navigate the complexities of a business empire. And yet here he was, driving through the streets in the late evening, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction mixed with the weight of responsibility. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the waiter insulting David Beckham? How do you think he reacted? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.